Good morning, fish friends and merbaes. Today I am talking about some traditions and also reading some Nancy Drew. I am sorry that my camera is not on. I wonder if I can get it to work. All right. Well, if you guys could go ahead and if you know how to make this work, let me know. Anyways, welcome. Today I am going to be reading again from Nancy Drew Mystery of the Moss Covered Mansion, but first I wanted to go ahead and talk about how what I've been learning about this week in one of my classes. I am currently working on my bachelor's of nursing and a minor in family and human development, and one of my classes about family and diversity in our discussion board, we were talking about traditions. And we were sharing traditions, well, a tradition that we have out of the many that we probably have. And it was an interesting prompt because our professor did not want us to talk about traditions like holiday traditions, like maybe for my family, we always have, cookies at grandma's on Christmas or near Christmas in December. And then we usually get together and have a ham for Easter or also Christmas. So it was really interesting, and I actually got to learn about a few traditions that my family could be participating in that we just have not had due to being, they're like European, so we haven't, really been associated with those probably for some time, but it'd be fun to go ahead and start. And I really like that they talked about traditions being something that you might not even recognize as a tradition because you have your normal everyday life traditions that you don't think about as being traditions. And that's kind of what got me to go, oh, I really need to get back to reading online here to share my love of reading, but also just in general, because my mom had set a tradition to read to us every night, and that's, I feel like, is what really inspired us to be the readers that we are. So, without further ado, let us start reading chapter 2 of Nancy Drew and the Mystery of the Moss-Covered Mansion. A quick recap. There had been a crash outside. You can check out that video before this or later, whichever. So chapter 2, Suspicious Message. And I got my Trader Joe's candied ginger. So good, by the way. And I got my water bottle. Anyways, chapter 2, Suspicious Message. Nancy watched her father's face carefully as he stared out the window. She knew he was trying to make up his mind about something important. Finally, he turned toward his daughter. I could use some help in solving the mystery of the explosive oranges. And, Nancy said hopefully, you think I might be able to help? The lawyer nodded. My client, Mr. Billington, was arrested for bringing explosive Hamlin oranges into the Space Center. He is out on bail, but his case is coming up soon. He's innocent. Mr. Billington owns a grove on Merritt Island, which produces only pineapple oranges. Someone secretly borrowed a truck of his and delivered several sacks of Hamlin oranges to the center. The person presented an official card bearing Mr. Billington's name and signed a slip with his signature. Of course, it was a forgery. Mr. Drew went on. Unfortunately, I can't represent him in Florida because I have no license to practice in that state. My main reason for going down is to engage the services of a Florida lawyer. He and I will work together on a legal angle. I can't stay long this time because I have other urgent matters coming up, but the mysterious culprit must be found before the trial. Nancy could not refrain from saying, Dad, if you can't remain on Merritt Island, how about Bess and George and Hannah and I making the trip and staying there? Just what I was thinking, her father replied. Mr. Billington received special permission from the authorities to leave Florida and come north to sign for the purchase of some property. The buyer is going to Europe, so the transaction had to be made at once. Mr. Billington had offered me the use of his house and car and invited anyone else I would like to bring along. He and Mrs. Billington are on their way now, but they have a caretaker and his wife who live in the residence. They're Anton and Tina Rizzardo. She takes care of the house and does the cooking. Anton is foreman of the Grove in the sorting and packing house. Bess and George said they would love to go, but would have to obtain permission from their parents. George made the long-distance call. First, she told her father about the accident in the wrecked car. But Bess and I are okay. It's too bad about the car, but I'm glad you and Bess weren't hurt, he replied. George, report the damage immediately to our insurance agent, Mr. Dowley. All right, Dad, George now told him about the proposed trip. That sounds great, Mr. Fain said. I'll ask the Marvins. He came back to the phone saying, It's okay. Have a good time. George spoke to her mother and Bess talked to her parents. When she finished, George phoned the insurance man, and within 15 minutes, he was at the Drew house. She gave Mr. Dowley all the details and promised to take charge of the matter. He promised to take charge of the matter. You go on to Florida and have fun, he said. When do you leave? George went to find Mr. Drew and ask him. He smiled. I'd like to hop a plane this afternoon, he said. Do you think you could be ready? George looked at her watch. It will take me about 20 minutes to pack some light clothes and my swimsuit. It was decided that the group would have an early lunch at the Drews and leave immediately afterward. While they were eating, the telephone rang. Nancy answered it. The others heard her exclaim, Ned, how good to hear from you. Where are you? From there on, Ned did most of the talking. He was an attractive Emerson College football player who dated Nancy exclusively. When she came back to the table, her eyes were sparkling. Great news, she announced. You know Ned's parents have had a house on Merritt Island for some time. Mr. and Mrs. Nickerson are there right now, and they're going to have a house party. Bess and George, you're invited, as well as myself, and Ned will bring Bert and Dave along. Bert Eddleton and Dave Evans were George's and Bess's favorite dates. They too went to Emerson College. Fabulous! Bess exclaimed. Super, George added. Nancy remarked, We'll have time to work on the mystery before the house party starts. Mr. Drew chuckled. Well, we'd better leave. I'll load your luggage in the car while you girls tidy up the kitchen. Hannah, will you see that all the doors and windows are locked and the burglar alarm set? The housekeeper hurried off to do this. Then the travelers grabbed their coats and left the house. On the way to the local airport, Mr. Drew said they had a choice of flying either to Orlando or Melbourne, Florida. Melbourne is a little closer to Florida, to Merritt Island. Sorry. So I've chosen that one. We land at Kennedy Airport there. I phoned the Billington house and asked Tina if she and Aunt would meet us. She agreed. I'm going to drink some water. Okay. Hours later, when the Drews and their friends reached Melbourne, they looked everywhere for the couple. No one fitting their description was around. Finally, only one elderly woman and a naval officer were left in the passenger waiting room. "I think I'll telephone the house and see what happened," Mr. Drew said. He closed himself into a phone booth and tried for 10 minutes to get an answer. At last he came outside. No one was there, so maybe the Rizzardos are on the way. I guess we'll just have to wait. An hour passed, and still Anton and Tina had not arrived. Mr. Drew was annoyed. I would be too. "We'll have to take a taxi," he said. "It'll be an expensive trip. I wonder what happened to the Rizzardos." The group enjoyed the ride past the many beautiful homes and glimmering lakes and inlets, some small, others large. When they reached Cocoa, the driver went back to... Sorry. I apologize. I keep messing up on reading because I lived in this area of Florida, and so I'm having flashbacks. Anyways, so when they reached Cocoa, the driver went across the bridge to Merritt Island, then along various winding roads. Finally, the taxi pulled up in front of a large Spanish-type house on the Indian River. The ground floor had a patio across the front and on one side. There were several chairs under a small grove of shade trees. While Mr. Drew was paying the taximan, Nancy went to the front door and rapped with the knocker. The visitors stood waiting, but no one came to let them in. George walked to the rear of the dwelling and pressed a buzzer at the back door. No response. She rejoined the others. "Nobody home," she announced, and dropped into a garden chair. Her companions also seated themselves and waited. About 20 minutes later, a car pulled into the driveway and a couple got out. As they approached the visitors, the man said, "We are the Rizzardos." "Where have you been?" Mr. Drew looked directly at Tina. "Exactly where I asked you to meet us." The woman rolled her eyes toward her husband but did not speak. He said angrily, "You told my wife we were to meet you at Orlando, but you weren't there." "I told her Melbourne," Mr. Drew replied, "but never mind. Just let us into the house, please. How much time do we have to unpack before dinner?" Anton glared at the newcomers. "My wife has a bad headache and must lie down. You people will have to get your own dinner." He unlocked the front door, ushered Tina in, and followed her. "Warm reception," Bess whispered to the other girls. "I can foresee trouble with that couple," George replied. Tina went upstairs, but Anton stalked to the back door and went out. He walked off to the right into a large orange grove. The newcomers climbed the stairs and chose bedrooms. They found that one was closed and locked and assumed this must lead to the Rosato's quarters. After unpacking, Hannah and the girls located the kitchen and examined the contents of the refrigerator. There was plenty of food for a good meal, and Hannah chose a big pot of chicken cooked with rice and gravy. The girls set the table in the flower-papered dining room, which had a large glass top table and white wicker chairs. When the meal was ready, Anton walked in. Without saying a word, he took one of the plates warming on the stove and helped himself to a very generous portion of everything. He then filled a second plate with food. He said to Hannah, "I'm taking this up to my wife. We'll eat in our room." The others assembled in the dining room, and after grace had been said, by Mr. Drew, they began to eat the delicious dinner. Before they had reached the dessert course, Anton came down the stairs carrying the empty plates, which he put into the sink. The others heard him open a cabinet door and knew he was getting plates for the dessert, which was an apple pie. The visitors were aghast to see Anton going through the hall with at least half the pie on 2 plates. After he'd gone upstairs, George burst out, "What's eating him?" Bess giggled, "Nothing. He's eating everything." Nancy jumped up and went out to look at the pie. The portion that was left, if cut into 5 slices, would give each person a piece 1 inch wide. "That man is a limit," she complained to Hannah, who had followed her. "He certainly is," the housekeeper agreed, "and I suppose he expects me to wash his dirty dishes." A little later, Anthony returned and left 2 empty plates. Nancy stopped him. Eager to start work on the mystery at once, she asked him what he knew about Mr. Billington's case. The caretaker scowled. Nothing that you don't know, he replied, and went down outdoors. From the window, Nancy saw him go into the orange grove. Dusk had fallen, and she could not see which direction he had taken. After the dishes had been put into the washer and the dining room vacuumed for crumbs, George said that she and Bess had promised to let their parents know of the girl's safe arrival. I'll do it, Bess offered, and went to the rear of the hall. As she picked up the phone, the unfamiliar voice of a man was saying, "You know what to do next. Keep your eye on all visitors." Bess hung up and came back to the living room to report the conversation. "Are the Billingtons on a party line?" she asked. "No," Mr. Drew answered. He frowned. "I don't like this. There must be an extension phone, and somebody in this place is talking on it." "I'll check," Nancy offered. She knew there was no other phone on the first floor, so she started to climb to the second. Halfway up the stairs, she heard a door close softly. She ran the rest of the way and walked along the hall. There was an extension in Mr. Billington's bedroom, but nobody was there. The Rosato's door was closed. Perhaps Tina was using the phone up here, Nancy thought. What had the message meant, she wondered. And were she and her father and her friends the visitors that the man had referred to? Nancy went downstairs and told the others her suspicions. "There's probably another extension outside somewhere," Nancy said. "Perhaps in the orange packing house. Let's see if anyone's there." All right. End of chapter 2. Thank you, everybody, for coming on today. Shout out to Cooley Pinna. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Saturday, and warm wishes and blessings to you all. Thank you. Bye.